if you are able to look at your own work and figure out how can I improve this, and you're able to find a few things that you can improve, like that feedback loop is like no other. The topic I want to talk to you about is the idea of progress. How do you know whether you're making progress or not? This is something that I have struggled with. And the reason for that is because you would typically look for indicators of progress, right? हम देखेंगे कि हम improve हो रहे हैं या नहीं. You look for indicators. And typically these indicators, if you zoom back, in school time, for example, your only indicator whether you were successful were your marks. There was this sort of external indicator which said that this is your, let's say, 10th grade, these are your marks, maybe you have boards. And those were sort of these external indicators that say, hey, you are on the right path. When you go to college and when you go to work, eventually these indicators change, but you have some semblance that you are going on the right path as time passes. And these kind of indicators are important because you want to feel progress. If you feel like you're not making progress, you are more likely to give up. And ideally, we don't want that. We don't want you to give up, right? We want you to be able to stick through whatever it is that you have started. The real problem comes when you're maybe in college, but you want to study something other than your degree, right? Maybe you're in computer science and you want to do design. Maybe you are in a commerce background and you now want to get into design. Or if it's a different field that you want to get into. Now, the problem starts where you don't have other people around you who will tell you, yes, you are making progress or improve over here. When that happens, it feels like I don't know whether I'm moving forward or whether I'm moving in the same direction. In general, the concept that I want you to remember from today is the idea of a feedback loop. Anytime you do something, you need that feedback of whether it went well, whether it didn't go well, and based on that, your decision in the future will change. So this missing ingredient in general is feedback loop, right? And the reason I call it a loop, and I don't just say feedback, the reason I call it a loop is that you do the work, you get some feedback, and then you do the work again. That creates a loop, right? In any other skill as well, you need feedback loops to make sure that every time you do an iteration, every time you do the same work again and again, maybe you designed one app or one sample app, you designed a few screens. The next time you do it, ideally you should improve based on your previous one. It should be better than your previous, right? At the bare minimum, you don't want to get worse. You want to either stay the same or get better. The way you get better, right? You've probably heard this, I think it's a very common cliche kind of phrase which says madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think it's something like that, right? You don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again and not making any progress, right? I don't 100% agree with that quote, although, but when you do things over and over again and you're not changing anything, you might be just moving in the same place. It might be more of a treadmill rather than actually running. Ideally, between your practice sessions, right? Your practice session 1, maybe you're designing something. Next day or 2 days later, you design something again. Third day, you design something again. And now I'm talking for the people who are more self-taught, people who are still learning. You want some feedback such that between the 2 sessions, you know something that you can improve, right? That's what creates a feedback loop. And if a feedback loop doesn't exist, it doesn't close, right? It stays an open loop. What that means is you do something, you get no feedback or you don't seek any feedback. And now when the second time you do it, you don't know what to change. So you do the exact same thing again. You might do the exact same thing a third time, exact same thing a fourth time. And that means you're not making progress. So feedback loops are very important. I'll tell you what my feedback loops were. When I first started, my initial feedback loop was, of course, asking friends. Number one, how can I change this? What do you think of this, right? Very basic stuff. But beyond that, a lot of the stuff I didn't really ask. I just looked, I just observed. I looked at other work and I said, I know I am not at this level, but how can I break it down to figure out steps that I can use to reach the level I want, right? And the way to do that is through a feedback loop. Now, in a company, you will also have this idea of a feedback loop exists throughout, right? One of the reasons you have this concept of marks and everything in college is because they've created their own version of a feedback loop to make sure people keep moving through the system. When you're working as an internship or maybe you get a job, the feedback loop at that point changes. The reason when you're applying for a job, you want to work with somebody who's a good manager, you want to work with a good team, is number one, if the team is way better than you, you will eventually rise to that same level, right? So you want to work as much as possible in a team that is better than you, so that you now have to increase your standards, right? That's the importance of choosing a good role. But beyond that, a manager is somebody who will helps set your feedback loops on top of your process, making sure you do your best work. And the way you do your best work is you do something and the manager helps you set direction. The manager will say, this is what's good about it. However, this is what we actually want. We want something like this. And I think you should change your direction to help reach this point. And when you do that, you now have feedback and you do it again, and now maybe you have a better outcome. A manager is somebody who does this for you. I want you to just imagine what would happen if there wasn't a feedback loop, right? Well, let's talk about the job side of things. If there wasn't a feedback loop, you're doing, let's say, an internship, and they ask you to do some work, and then they say, boss, feel nahi aa rahi isme feel nahi aa rahi, kuch aur kar sakte hain. Now, the problem with that kind of feedback, ki feel nahi aa rahi, is that it tells you something is wrong, but it doesn't tell you which direction to go. It doesn't say feel nahi aa rahi, but feel yahan pe hai. Aisa kuch try karo, ya aisa kuch try karo, right? That's the biggest problem with getting feedback like that. But imagine if they didn't tell you anything. You would just do the work and you just kept doing it, and you had no idea whether it was going well or not. Typically, that's when there's a feedback loop missing. When you are getting started as a self-taught designer and you don't have a manager, let's say, you're not working for anybody yet, you need some type of feedback loop. I'm assuming most of you are self-learning. I have been self-taught as well. My feedback loop initially was my friends, right? They were also doing design and I would ask them. That's probably the first place you should start. Try to find other people who are also on a similar journey like you. There's a lot of communities out there, right? You can definitely join the 10K designers community, right? There's a lot of people there who are also in a similar position. If you don't have people around you who are also designers, this is number one. It's super important. Doing this by yourself when you don't know anybody else who's doing something similar can be demotivating. You feel like you're the only one doing something. As a self-taught designer, try to find other people who are also designers. Number two, I would say, is eventually you want to start actually freelancing. Now, this might seem like odd advice, right? How can I start freelancing if I'm still a beginner? Freelancing is usually important because even as a beginner, when you freelance, you get the idea of what it's like to work in a feedback loop, right? You work with, let's say, some client. Maybe they have a small project for you. They're like, hamare liye just design a couple of ads for us, a couple of banners for us. Let's say it's some kind of graphic design kind of thing. A feedback loop exists because you don't have unlimited time. You have fixed number of hours. Something needs to get done. And typically doing multiple of this can help you get that kind of experience. A question that I have here, which is any tips on asking feedback from experienced designers? Now, the biggest tip is to understand that they are actually doing you a favor. And this is actually really hard. Asking feedback from other designers is harder or just as hard as you would expect. Technically, it is super hard though. Because the problem is giving feedback is something which takes a lot of time and effort, right? And besides that, the person giving the feedback, they want to know that, hey, my feedback, if I'm going to spend this much time, will actually be useful. They don't want to give you the wrong feedback by accident. Now, the problem is if you don't have any kind of relationship with them, then there's no incentive for them to spend that time, maybe 20-30 minutes giving you feedback. or if they don't know what exactly you're trying to do with your project. So my tips is, ideally you want to find somebody who cares. And once you find that person, try to maintain a relationship with them. The problem is if you directly ask without giving anything in return, that's a one-sided relationship, right? As a self-taught designer, if you do want to ask from experienced people, you have to understand that their time is extremely valuable. So if you are reaching out to some of them, you have to make it worth their while sometimes. But I would definitely suggest starting with the Discord community, because we have a dedicated feedback channel there. And some of our alumni and some of our mentors of 10K designers are kind of active there, right? So I would definitely start there, but it is definitely tricky getting feedback, right? Unless it's a real project, unless they have hired you for it, or you are working with them on the same team. With these two reasons, your incentives are really aligned. The reason they would give you feedback is you're on the same project, and now for the project success, they know you also need to be successful. Now that's a perfect incentive. But if you're not doing that, it can be difficult. And I will say this about feedback as well. Asking somebody, how can I improve? And them telling you is not the only way of receiving feedback. Feedback can be implicit or explicit. Explicit would be them directly telling you, hey, this is the direction, this is what you want to change. But implicit feedback would be you trying to figure out yourself. You comparing with, let's say, somebody else, their work. Or ideally, you don't want to compare yourself to others who might be experts when you're a beginner. You want to compare yourself to your previous design. That is a solid feedback loop if you can get that going. If you are able to look at your own work and figure out how can I improve this, and you're able to find a few things that you can improve, like that feedback loop is like no other, right? Because you are the main one there. If you enjoyed that video, please, of course, let us know. Leave a like and comment. But besides that, this is what we do for a living. We help creatives and designers level up in their careers. If you'd like to join one of our live programs, we do them a few times a year. Check out the link in the description. It's 10kdesigners.com, and I'll see you around.